There you go. So just want to make sure everybody knows that this is being recorded. It will be posted on the website, and it just might take a few weeks to get that done. We're transitioning some of the videos, and so I'm working on that as we speak for the session we had last week, as well as this session. But I do have resources for you that you can follow along with. So I have posted the PowerPoint slides and a brief handout on the PBIS Maryland website. If you go to the link that I just posted in chat, you will be able to find that information. I will orient you to that in a moment. I want to just let you know that today we're talking about relationship-based responding. I want to just couch this in kind of the history of PBIS in Maryland and the long history of the partnership that's gotten us to where we are today, and making sure that you all know, however, that the real foundation of this work is based on the implementation and continued dedication to implementation across the various school systems in the state of Maryland. The resources, like I said, are in the on our website in pbismaryland.org, as well as I have just a handout that you could follow for any of the activities that we do. The session is being recorded, will be posted. The link to the materials is in the chat. I will try to re-chat that a few times as people join. What you will do is the link will take you to the coaches meeting page, and then you will just scroll down and look for information related to relationship-based responding. Okay. You can also find on there the various other webinars that we have completed over the years. All right, so what I'd like to do now, in order to just get to know each other, I'll provide a really brief introduction about myself, and then I want to get to know you all. So my name is Jennifer Jeffrey Pearsall. I'm the director of the PBIS Technical Assistance and Training Center at Shepherd Pratt, and have been a partner in supporting the work in PBIS in Maryland for the last, I think, 7 years now. And I have supported schools and states and districts across a variety of different states with their implementation of PBIS or MTSS for about a little over like 23 years, I think it has been. And the other areas that I work in with this framework are supporting alternative settings for youth, whether it's residential settings or alternative day schools, as well as juvenile justice and corrections facilities. And then finally, some of the work that I do is around supporting our state here in Maryland and Minnesota in how we can utilize the framework of PBIS to help support agencies that support adults, or our kids that transition into adulthood and beyond, who have intellectual and developmental disabilities and often comorbid mental health concerns, in supporting using PBIS or MTSS in home and employment settings. Right. So that's a little bit about me. What I'd like to do is have you all introduce yourself in chat. If you could put your name in chat, as well as the school system that you are coming from and representing today. And the other thing I'd like you to do is also share your role. If you're a teacher, if you're a PBIS coach, if you're all of the above, as well as if you could tell me what your favorite ice cream is. All right. I would love to know that. Just a little something different. We can know our names, we can know our location, and now we know what ice cream we like. All right. So we have some cookies and cream and mint chocolate chip. All right. We have some directors in here, as well as special educators we've got folks from Carroll County and Wicomico County. I will share my favorite. And that is vanilla with lots of toppings, right? It's a blank canvas for all the toppings that I love to add on there. All right, so we have some social workers. Dorchester is here, as well as we have some folks from Howard County, as well as Harford County. Alternative education programs, excellent. And hope you're very specific too. Ben and Jerry's chocolate fudge brownie, I love it. All right, so we have a range of folks here today, which I'm really pleased to see. You can keep them coming. I'm not going to recognize everybody on here. I wish I was reading that fast. But thanks, Lynn, for sharing too from Prince George's County. Multiple hats there, right? Middle school PBIS coach, special education teacher, equity committee, and a lover of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Fantastic. So what I'd like to do today is talk to you about that, what relationship-based responding really within the context, couching it within talking through that, thinking about that MTSS or PBIS logic. I'll share that in a minute. Then I'm going to provide really brief reminders of prevention strategies. All right, no deep dive, not getting into the how-tos on those. We can go back to find other resources on some of those strategies. And then I wanted to just discuss the relationship informed responses to challenging behaviors or situationally inappropriate behaviors in school, things like empathy, function-based responding, vulnerable decision points, and neutralizing routines, as well as verbal de-escalation. I also will get some talking points in here around self-reflection for students, and have an opportunity for you all to reflect on these strategies and how this aligns with your current approaches, and get you action planning-ish, as far as what I'd like you to do is when we talk about a topic is think about how does this relate to my current context? What are some action steps I might want to take after this? And there's a handout in the online in our resources that will just prompt you a little bit in those topic areas for when I have embedded action planning time or discussion time. Real brief reminder that I'm going to couch this conversation within an MTSS framework, and I'm coming from the perspective that PBIS was really it was the original kind of social emotional behavioral MTSS. And but MTSS in and of its whole, you should see these features in place across the board in schools implementing PBIS or MTSS or RTI. And we, having shared leadership, making sure there's screening and progress monitoring in place, that there's a layer of continuum of supports, evidence-based instruction, assessment, and intervention, data-based problem solving, and family, school, and community partnerships. I'm really going to be tapping into some of this evidence-based instruction and assessment approaches that we can engage in when thinking about being proactive about behavior management, and how we respond, and also how we can respond to those situationally inappropriate behaviors that will help continue to keep the student engaged in the setting. Additionally, thinking about those core elements of MTSS or PBIS is we're always outcomes driven. We're centering equity throughout every decision that we make. So that's where we should be thinking about every decision from that equity lens. We want to be using our data to inform where the needs are, and we can think about that on a universal level with all students, but also up to the individual student need. And then linking practices based to students based on their needs. So what do all students need? What do some students need? And what do individual students need that are individualized and intensified? And then finally, focusing on the systems to support staff in implementing the different strategies across tiers. And when we talk about different response strategies today, I want you to think about what are the systems that we need to put into place to have staff engage in some of these strategies. As we get into this, I want to think about discipline. So I wanted to get some of your thoughts here about, what are some strategies that I'm going to ask you to define discipline in a minute. But to start with, I want to get some ideas from you about strategies that we use to build relationships with students, right? This session is called relationship-based responding. So share in chat some of the strategies that you use as educators or you see your colleagues using to build relationships with students. Interest inventories. Thank you. All right, journaling, excellent. Question of the day, greetings at the door. Yep, greetings, asking them about their day. Learning the names and using that when speaking to students. Social emotional learning check-ins, thanks. Being a listening ear, excellent. Restorative questions, a calming area being provided. You're listing a lot of things that we're going to touch on today, and it's thinking about how do we organize these things in a way to leverage those when we are in situations where we need to respond. So what comes to mind when you think about and you hear about the terms like thinking about relationship-based responding, having a safe space for students? All right, thanks, Lynn. Other ideas for what comes to mind when you hear relationship-based responding? Do a lot of the same things come to mind? Or when you think about responding to students through that relationship lens, what are some of the things? Demonstrating empathy. All right, seeking understanding. Yep, using what you know about the student to guide your decision making. Using relationships to leverage the connection. Yep. Yeah, you know, having that relationship. One thing that a colleague of mine has talked about, and the Gottman Institute also talks about, is kind of thinking about you know, relationships, if you will, as a bank account. You're gonna, you know, we want to put in a lot of the positives. We want to make a lot of those deposits, right, that are positive in nature, that help build that relationship, because there will become times, no matter who we are and what we do, that we're going to have to make a withdrawal from that relationship, right? We in the case of a teacher and student, we're going to have to correct a student. We'll likely have to provide some feedback, corrective feedback, again, across a continuum. And so you want that bank account, that relationship personal bank account, to be full, right, of the positives, so that when you do have to make a withdrawal, that you're not overdrawing your account. Yeah, meeting with students where they are and building from there. Thank you. All right, and then finally, what is something that you think about when the definition of discipline? What is the definition? How do we typically define discipline, or what are some terms that come to mind when you think of the term discipline in schools? A consequence, accountability. And when you were talking about Morgan, and I don't know if it's Kina or Kenna, the consequence, is that a corrective action, like a corrective consequence? And I see Lynn, your corrective action. Kathleen, learning opportunity. And equity. Typically punishment should be a natural consequence. And yeah, discipline, which means to teach, right? Yes, Faith. Yeah, you know, we talk about discipline in schools, and, you know, discipline really is the aspect of teaching, you know, and it's the aspect of kind of honing in on a skill and building a skill and having the discipline to stick with it, right? And teachable moments. Perfect. So that gives us, you know, just some thoughts around what are relationships, what comes to mind with those relationship-based responding and discipline in and of itself. What I want to take you through today are just some ideas around a real comprehensive discipline system. And I borrowed this from my colleagues in Florida, because I thought it provided a really nice visual of thinking about the prevention aspects, the response aspects, and the follow-up aspects. So we'll spend like just probably less than 2 minutes on the prevention aspects, because there are other places where you can find these resources. But what they've listed up here are things like putting relationships first, really investing in your tier 1 PBIS systems, thinking through those universal designs for learning, or UDLs, making sure that learning environment is proactive, that there are the supports in place, and then there's also that in family engagement. We're going to talk through some of these response strategies, not all of them, and we'll touch on reintegration. All right. And this should come as no surprise to you. You all, through what you were talking about and the fact that you're here listening to this, I'm sure that you were all well aware that we want to spend the majority of our time in the prevention realm, right? That if we can really attend to those prevention types of strategies, we're setting up the environment for success. Those prevention strategies, I'm going to talk about some social emotional, behaviorally based prevention strategies, but we also have a strong academic aspect of this, of really good core curriculum, really amazing instructional delivery, and making sure that students are matched appropriately to the level of instruction and curriculum that they're being, encouraged and pushed to excel, but at a level that is not frustrating, right? And so the instructional aspect of prevention is critical. I'm going to be talking about some of the social, emotional, and behavioral aspects of prevention that we have in our toolkit from that MTSS PBIS lens. And so 3 things that come to mind that are, some of the most efficient ways that we can start building relationships or continue to build relationships with students that have evidence base behind them are things like behavior specific praise. And again, that's knowing, what the student is doing, acknowledging the student's behavior, linking it back to perhaps a school-wide expectation, giving some form of acknowledgement. And we want to be engaging in praise at a 5-to-1 ratio of positive interactions to corrections, those positive verbal interactions. Now, keep in mind, not every student wants a nice, public verbal praise statement. So it's getting to know what students want and being able to deliver that praise and that recognition contextually according to what their interests are. And so that's an area that if you're not seeing as much praise to correction ratios in your school, you might want to focus in on that. The other is greetings at the door. That was mentioned in a comment. Again, another evidence-based practice at the tier 1 level for helping to build connections with students. And that's simply greeting the student at the door, making sure it's a kind of a positive interaction. And then also there's associated with it is the opportunity to have something once they're in the classroom that really structures the next few things that they're supposed to do. So what are they supposed to do as soon as they come into the classroom? A few things to set them up for success as you're greeting others at the door. And then a 2x10 method, which is more of we're moving up from tier 1 to tier 2, but for some students that are not, that we don't know, that feel like there's a connection to an adult in the building, is the 2x10 method. And these methods, these strategies are in other previous trainings on the PBIS website that you can pull from. But the 2x10 method is that an adult in the building meets with a student for 2 minutes for 10 days. And they talk about non-school related things that are of interest to the student. So it might be you notice that they're wearing a shirt from a specific band or athletic team, and starting a conversation about that. Again, it's 2 minutes for 10 days, talking about non-school related issues and topics. And so those are quick ways to build connections with students and investing in those prevention activities. There are many more prevention activities like that were mentioned on the previous slide. These were 3 that I just wanted to highlight for you to remind you to kind of go back and think about from your school's perspective. Are we investing in some of these strategies, prevention strategies, especially if there are kind of hot spots within our building or our challenging times of the year with student behavior? I want to spend the bulk of our time talking about relationship-based responding and touch on a few strategies that can be helpful when thinking about responding in challenging situations. And again, we're talking, I'm going to be talking more along the lines, the beginning of the escalation cycle. Not necessarily responding in a crisis situation. We have other, all of these are helpful, but there are other strategies that we can employ in crisis situations with students. The strategies that I'm talking about are kind of the precursors to try to bring the student back down keep students in the classroom, reduce our need to engage in exclusionary practices with students, whether that's sending a student to the office, sending them to a buddy room for a timeout, or things that are more intense like out of school suspensions, right? So empathy is a strategy that came up in the list that you all shared. And when we think about empathy, things that we consider with empathy are having an understanding or sharing of somebody's feelings. So kind of those shared emotional responses where we are mirroring the responses of others. So if if somebody has had a tremendous accomplishment, if they have won a race, or if they have won an award at school and they're excited about it, that we kind of mirror that excitement with them. We might even have some of the same physical reactions, right? And so we might cheer as they're cheering themselves, crossing a finish line or scoring a goal. Perspective taking is where we are really starting to understand the other's feelings and trying to get a sense of what their perspective is, where they are coming from in the situation. And when I'm talking about empathy here, and it's the staff use of empathy, we, have spent a lot of time over the last few years specifically, and years prior, talking and teaching empathy to students, right? And which is a lifelong skill. And when we're talking here about responding to the behaviors through that relationship-based lens, this is taking it through the teacher's lens of employing empathy as a response strategy in challenging situations with students. So I'm going to share with you a video here, and you can put a thumbs up or a reaction in chat if you have seen this, but I'm going to share a quick video with you around empathy. I'm going to pause it for a moment. Can you hear that? If you can give me a thumbs up, if you could hear the introduction or not. Oh, great. Okay, good. I didn't know if my sharing challenges was going to hurt me in that one. All right, I'll continue.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. Any reactions to that video? Let me. There we go. Any reflections, reactions to that video? Has anybody seen that video before?
I really like that video, and it's interesting because today I had a situation. It wasn't with a student, but it was with an adult, and it was a really difficult situation. And I really didn't know what to say, but I did just try to, say, I'm sorry you're going through that. And, let me know if there's something else I can do. I had something that I could offer, but yeah, it's very much, I think it's very much needed with kids who, especially kids who are just like in this mess of feelings, right? And they can't figure out what's going on with them or what they need or how to get the help the support that they need.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. We'll talk about function in a moment, but there is always behavior is a form of communication, right? And so when students are behaving in a way that doesn't align with the expectations in the setting and in the situation, that's a form of communication, and we have to figure out why. We also have to spend some time to understand that there could be a lot of things loading into that behavior that might have been triggered immediately by something that just happened in the environment, but that there are other things kind of behind the scenes in the student's life that are impacting and influencing their choices at that moment. So if you're coming from that trauma-informed lens, then empathy can be a really strong tool in your in the range of strategies that you have in working with students. And yeah, so a few folks have seen this before. And so Lynn, thanks for sharing that you're also the Pride sponsor, and you had some deep things that are shared with you as well. So again, thinking that continuum, and yeah, we certainly need to pull empathy in when we're talking to students with real complex needs. But we can also employ empathy at a very low level with students who are just experiencing some minor level challenges in the classroom, modeling empathy, but also using empathy as a way to kind of diffuse the situation, de-escalate the situation. I'm not going to share with you this video because I'm kind of more talking through the adult perspective of empathy, but this is a video that is empathy as described by children. So I came across it and I thought I'd throw that resource in here for you. The link is in the chat. So what I'd like you to do right now, pardon me, is I would like for you to take a minute and think, and feel free to chat in here. Or, you can also self-reflect on this one, but where does the strategy and use of empathy align with your current policies and or priorities within your school or your school system? And what suggestions for action and can you take to back to your team or your administrator to support staff use of empathy? Yeah, so social emotional learning is coming up as an area of alignment. I want you to think about alignment through all of this because you want to thread that needle, right? You want to bring it back to what you already value and you already prioritize in your building. Oftentimes when we talk about empathy with social emotional learning, we're talking about teaching kids empathy, right? Teaching kids to use the strategy of empathy. And we want to be able to use that strategy ourselves. And so it could be that there's a prioritizing or suggestions to maybe engage in some, I don't know, training, professional learning communities around empathy with staff at the end of the year now or the beginning of next year. So take a minute to think about the resources that you might share training that
Not
you might,
always on time either, but we were there like.
there we go. All right, yeah, bully prevention, SEL, equity, student directed learning. Thank you. All right, I want to just pause for about another 30 seconds for you to jot down any ideas that you come to mind on how you might want to move with empathy for staff as a strategy moving forward. Restorative approaches. Yep, thanks. All right, the next area, if you're still writing, feel free to tell me, to chat that you need another minute. If not, I will continue to move on here. The other strategy that I want to talk about here is function-based thinking and function-based responding. I'm not going to give you a full training on the function of behavior, but I do want to touch on the fact that this is an area that can be extremely helpful to focus in on so that all staff understand function of behavior, so that all staff are on the same page with getting organized around how we think about why. Again, behavior is communication. There is a reason for behavior happening. And typically there are kind of two big buckets of function that can be broken into 6 smaller buckets. But the 2 big buckets, we're either trying to get something or we're trying to get out of something. And it could be that we're trying to obtain or get some kind of activity or access to something. It could be, a kid on a playground trying to get access to, the climbing area on the playground. It could be that we're trying to get something social like teachers' attention or peers' attention, or we're trying to get away from those things. Could be that students trying to avoid a hard academic task, or, get or avoid essentially sensory stimulation. So it can feel sometimes like a student is just trying to be challenging, right? When we ask, why are they doing this? And we get staff input on the why, it's not always linked to the function, right? It's not always linked to this concept of, well, they were trying to get something or trying to get out of something. And if we spend time with staff on understanding function, it helps to shape responses that are more function informed. So I want to go over this vignette real quick, and thinking about a situation where an 8th grade student is asked to share their approach to completing a pre-algebra equation. When the teacher asks, the student kind of looks away and ignores, ignores the teacher, not the student. The teacher then tries to encourage a response from the student to share their thinking with the whole class, but then this kind of sets the trigger out for the student, who then verbally refuses and then walks out of class. So what is the perceived function in that situation? Why do you think the student has engaged in that verbally disruptive refusal behavior and walking out of class? Because this is what we're going to ask teachers to do. Avoidance. Yeah. Avoiding what do you think, Morgan, or anybody else? Not to call you out, Morgan. Yeah. Not knowing the answer. So yeah, avoiding the task. All right. Work avoidance. What else might they be avoiding? Embarrassment. Yeah. Hope. Yeah. That social, the social attention around that. So definitely. And so, yeah, the perceived function. So they're trying to get out of something, a challenging task, something that they can't do, perhaps embarrassment. And so what could the teacher do differently? Any suggestions? In the next situation, if they're thinking function-based, what could the teacher do differently? Have a whole class response. Give the student an alternative way to respond. Ask for volunteers to answer. Yeah, great. And so, sometimes a student, those great alternatives to the scenario here. Think, pair, and share. Perfect. Sometimes the behavior of the student verbally refusing and walking out of the class, it kind of sets us up for a different emotional reaction, and we'll get to that in a minute, where it feels like it's defiance. And sometimes when you ask staff, it could be, well, they're just challenging me, and if we take it back to the why and get folks thinking about that perceived function, either to get something or to get out of something, then we can respond differently. And so you've addressed a lot of the, some suggestions here. Calling on a different student could be one. Like you said, asking for volunteers, having the whole group answer. You could also, in this situation, you could pre-teach an opportunity to respond so the student experiences success if this is a student who has challenges with some of the content. All right. So the big idea is thinking function-based and thinking about how we can get and really build capacity of staff to understand deeply the function of behavior, and being able to think in the moment about the why, perceived why, right? We're not doing a functional analysis. We're not doing any kind of real deep dive into this, but there needs to be a lot of on the spot thinking about why and the function. So I want you to take a moment, if you have thoughts about this, to think about where does the staff use of understanding of function-based thinking align with your current priorities, and then any action items that you want to take from this. So I'll just give you a moment to either write those notes on your own. You can also share in chat if you'd like to. Yeah, so Morgan, it helps to be more mindful, reflective, and considerate. Perspective taking is important. Yeah, and understanding the why, the what purpose is this behavior serving? How is it paying off for the student to engage in this more disruptive behavior than it is to engage in the desired behavior or the requested behavior at the time? And we could talk about function-based thinking for probably another 2 hours and really deep dive into that. The big idea is that we often reserve those terms about function and behavior when we are thinking about more individualized behavior support planning for students. But we really just need to pull that function-based thinking down to that tier 1 level at the universal level, and have all staff really understanding the function, what function of behavior is. And becoming more fluent and kind of on the spot hypothesizing about the function, whether it's to get something or to get out of something. Okay. So thank you, Morgan. All right, I'm going to move on to vulnerable decision points and neutralizing routines, because these are strategies that are helpful in helping us understand the situation and how we respond, or we are kind of more likely to respond in certain situations. I'm going to put the link in the chat here for the Don't Discipline Hangry link, and just talk to you about vulnerable decision points for a moment. When we think about vulnerable decision points, we're talking about This is a given situation that is coupled with a person's internal state that increases the likelihood of bias affecting the discipline decision-making at the time, all right? And so it often is a situation where we're not acting in alignment with our goals or our values as an educator. And so we need to understand our vulnerable decision points, and then how do we diffuse these? I am going to not play this video, but if you've seen any Snickers videos, you know that if, you know, they typically will have, different personalities when you're hangry. For the sake of time, I'm not going to play that one today, but they're plentiful on the internet to be able to see those Snickers ads. What I want you to think about here is, you know, again, if we really want to be, we can train and you know, spend time building capacity for staff and understanding vulnerable decision points and neutralizing routines. And so one thing that the way that we go about doing this is talking through the process of thinking about the school day and identifying activities or situations that are challenging or the most challenging to staff. And this is individual. Each individual would do this, identifying your hot buttons or behaviors that trigger you, identify a range, ones that are moderate to more an immediate and intense situations, and identify how you feel during those moments, and then develop a plan to neutralize. So it could be that some of the more challenging activities or situations for me as a teacher could be when students are talking out, hallway transitions. If I'm being observed as a classroom teacher and things don't go right, it could be that the hot button is when there's a student running or the student challenges my directions, especially if I'm being observed. And in the moment, I may feel frustrated, stressed, or insecure. And I need to be able to be cognizant of my own, how the environment is triggering me and my own kind of emotion, like physiological reactions, as well as any kind of cognitive talk that's going on, and be able to neutralize that routine. So, you know, like I said, the first strategy is to take staff through these three elements of, you know, what are my challenging times of the day? What are the really hot button behaviors that trigger me? And what are the feelings associated with that? And then we talk about thinking through the process of identifying neutralizing routines. So the goal is really to create a space between whatever is the trigger and the response. So making sure there's a delay, that we can delay a decision until you can think clearly. So sometimes not acting is a form of acting and responding. It could be that in the situation, you want to make sure that you're aligning your actions align with your values, and then that there's an opportunity for you as the adult in the situation or the staff in the situation to take care of yourself. So it's a real if-then kind of statement. So if a student interrupts the class while I'm being observed, I feel embarrassed and angry, then I will take 2 deep breaths or more and ask the student to see me after class, right? And so you know, as you go through this, if you think about this, what I want you to be thinking about is how does this align with your priorities, and what suggestions you can take back to your staff and your team and your administrators to help support this. All right. I'm going to touch on verbal de-escalation in some reflection strategies before we end for the day. So verbal de-escalation is now, you know, those other strategies of kind of empathy and the vulnerable decision points are helpful in that early escalation process. And so as students are starting to escalate and haven't really peaked in that process, so we're not seeing real crisis situations, verbal de-escalation is a strategy that can be used for students who are at risk for aggression. It's And this is from Kerr and Nelson. It's using calming language along with other communication techniques to diffuse, redirect, or de-escalate a conflict situation. And, in schools, we have a range of staff with a range of different training that they bring to them and lived experiences as well. And so sometimes we'll find that like special educators might have had more training in verbal de-escalation or specific strategies to help de-escalate situations, and maybe not all staff. So it could be helpful for all staff to really think about verbal de-escalation and learning some strategies for verbal de-escalation. And I'm going to touch on a few of these today. I'm going to touch on the clarifying statements and questions, summarizing and paraphrasing. We've already talked about empathy and the idea that silence and not responding in the moment at that exact moment could be a good strategy to use to allow yourself to create that space and employ your neutralizing routine. So when we talk about clarifying statements, there are ways that we can go through and clarify with statements and questions. These need to be prepared in advance and practiced. So again, opportunities to engage in professional learning. It could be that we have, collaborative work groups or opportunities to work together as staff to talk about what could our clarifying statements and questions be, what things feel comfortable for me to say in the moment, and so wanting to make sure that you clarify for the student what is happening. And so those are those clarifying statements. You're not in trouble. This is a chance for me to hear your side of the story. I want to understand what happened and how to respond, as well as clarifying questions. So what do you need right now to calm yourself? All right, I saw you were frustrated with math. Is that why you're upset? Do you need to take a moment to yourself, or would you like to talk? Right. So making sure you have some clarifying statements and some clarifying questions at your handy. So when you are confronted with behaviors that are situationally inappropriate, unexpected, you have things that are natural to say in the moment. So I want to get a sense from you all, what are some clarifying questions or statements that have worked for you? And if you could share those in chat, that would be fantastic. And I'll put the examples back up too, because they might help trigger your memory. All right. Yep, you're not in trouble. I just want to understand what happened. Yep. And can you tell me more? So yeah, the clarifying question of, can you tell me more, right? It seems like you're struggling today. What can I do to help? And I think this is too where the strategy of empathy can come into play, and trying to that perspective taking aspect of empathy, trying to understand the function too of why a student is engaging in a behavior, and kind of weaving that all together in order to ask those questions, right? If you think of any other ones, feel free to put them in chat so that others can hear some of the statements and strategies that have worked for you. Yeah, what color are you on? If you're on zones of regulation, and really teaching students to self-reflect on their own internal emotional state that they're in. Yep. What would make things better? Yeah, thinking about those solutions. Great. All right, keep them coming in there. I'm going to move forward a little bit just to get to the reflection aspect. We also talk about summarizing and paraphrasing. So once you do learn from the student, it's kind of repeating back what you heard, so that you're really clear without making interpretations of what they're going through. And then making sure you have a plan. So if a strategy works, make note of that strategy. Think about situations in which you need to engage in verbal de-escalation and practice those skills, right? And then I finally want to touch on reflection and thinking about, and again, I borrowed these from our colleagues in Florida, and thinking about reflection, and what they talked about were kind of some of the considerations that we need to take when thinking about student reflection opportunities for students to reflect upon their behavior, so that our responses to unexpected behaviors or behaviors that are situationally inappropriate are that of being instructional and supportive and restorative. And so when you want to be thinking about, whether what the student's learning history is, and if there are, visual supports or assistance needed to complete any kind of reflection activity or assignment. Again, existing relationships with school. So being proactively working to establish those relationships, but also I might not be the best person to engage in a reflection activity with a student. So is there another adult in there that could help with this assistance, that has that connection, have that relationship with the student? Again, thinking relationship first, and how can we help this student through this process with a trusted adult, somebody they have a connection with. So the other strategies include are listed there, thinking about separating the doer from the deed, and thinking about the behavior versus the person and putting that in context. Right. The other thing I wanted to talk about too is we often have reflection questions, and this is, pulling from some of the restorative questions that we have, and making sure that there are different ways that we talk through these questions at different ages. And you all are likely doing this already. I just wanted to put this in here as just a reminder of how we can differentiate our language so that we're getting to the same intention with these reflection opportunities, but using language with the right age groups or developmental stages in life, or just overall developmental needs of the students to elicit that kind of accurate, reflection from students along the way. And then finally, I just want to share with you when it comes to reintegration. I thought this was a great visual, again, that I borrowed from our Florida folks, that talks about different ways that we can help reintegrate students back into the classroom, so using restorative questioning, restorative chats, and how do we, scaffold that, and all of the restorative practices or restorative approaches folks on this call could easily map out what that looks like across a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, thinking about the intensity of the behaviors along the way. So we want to match our reintegration strategies with the intensity of the incident or the harm that is done. All right. And that will help continue with those relationships. So we're at 4. I will stay for questions, but I also want to remind folks that there is a session coming up on May 11th and then on June 6th. I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to put a evaluation in here if you don't mind completing that. Feedback is fantastic. And yes, Hope, I am going to put the link for the slideshow in chat. It's posted on the PBIS Maryland website, and you can find that there. All right. And as you are, I want to thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. It's such a busy time of the year, and I'm so thankful that you were all on with me and you put up with the first, 6 minutes or so of me struggling with my slide deck. So I appreciate that. If you are a PBIS school, there's recognition coming up, and you can reach out to your district coordinators about that as well. Right, so thank you very much. And I will stay for any questions or comments, but I will pause the recording at this time.